Night had already settled over Iguala, heavy and unremarkable, the kind of night people forget as soon as morning comes. Streetlights hummed softly, shops were closing, parents were finishing dinner. No one watching the clock believed this night would become a wound that never healed. 43 young men were preparing for a journey they had taken many times before, unaware that history was quietly stepping into their path. They were students from the Ayotzinapa Rural Teachers College. Young men training to become teachers for Mexico's poorest communities. Many came from farming families. Some were the first in their homes to reach higher education. They believed in protest, in organization, in making noise when silence failed. That belief would guide their steps that evening, as it always had. Before we go deeper, let me ask you something gently as you listen. Where are you right now, and what time is it for you? Is it late night, early morning, or that quiet hour when the world seems paused? If this kind of calm storytelling helps you rest, remember to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps these stories find others who need them too. Their plan was simple: travel to Iguala, take buses, head toward Mexico City for an upcoming demonstration. It was routine, familiar, almost boring. Laughter mixed with fatigue as they packed their bags. Some joked, some sent messages home. None of them sent a goodbye. What they could not see was that this night was already crowded with invisible watchers. Police radios crackling, phones vibrating with orders, alliances quietly shifting in the dark. By the time the first bus engine turned over, something irreversible had already begun. And as the buses rolled out into the night, one question lingered unanswered, waiting patiently for the hours ahead. Who was watching them leave, and why? The buses were taken quickly, almost clumsily, like so many times before. Students boarded with backpacks and exhaustion, spreading themselves across seats worn smooth by decades of travel. Windows rattled, engines groaned. The road ahead looked ordinary, stretching into darkness with no hint of danger. As Iguala approached, the mood shifted. There was tension, not fear exactly, but awareness. This city had a reputation. Protests here were never entirely welcome. Still, no one expected what came next. No warning, no negotiation, just movement turning suddenly into chaos. Let me pause here for a moment. Wherever you are listening from, your bedroom, a quiet bus, a darkened room, what time is it right now? If these stories travel with you through the night, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. Police vehicles appeared, then more, lights flashing, orders shouted. Confusion spread faster than understanding. Some students thought it was intimidation. Others believed it would pass. It always had before, but this time the police did not leave. Shots were fired into the air. Buses were blocked. Students ran. Others froze. Time fractured into moments. A foot slipping, a name shouted, a phone dropped to the pavement. In the noise, no one noticed how carefully the exits were sealed. In the middle of the night, as fear tightened its grip, something darker unfolded. Students were separated, taken, forced into vehicles that did not belong to them. Witnesses would later struggle to explain how quickly it happened, how official uniforms blended into lawlessness. By the time silence returned to the streets, 43 students were gone. Not lost, not missing in the ordinary sense, gone in a way that felt deliberate, permanent. And as dawn approached, a terrifying question rose with the sun. If police were involved, who could the families possibly turn to? Morning arrived like an insult. Birds sang, shops opened, traffic moved. The world continued, unaware that 43 families were waking to something far worse than grief: uncertainty. Phones rang without answers. Messages went unread. Hope clung stubbornly to every unanswered call. Parents began arriving at police stations, then hospitals, then military offices. Each door closed gently, politely, firmly. No records, no information, no students in custody. The word missing began to circulate, but no one wanted to accept it. Let me ask you again softly, where are you listening from, and what time is it now? If you're still with me, still awake, please remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. These stories only survive because people stay to hear them. Officials offered explanations that shifted by the hour. The students had been handed to criminals. The students had fled. The students were never there. Each version contradicted the last. Each denial cut deeper. Families sensed it immediately. The truth was being buried faster than it could be found. In the middle of the investigation, something chilling emerged. Surveillance footage missing. Radio logs incomplete. Witnesses silenced. It felt less like a search and more like an erasure. The kind that requires cooperation, not chaos. As protests spread across Mexico and beyond, a phrase echoed louder each day. Vivo es ese los leveren, vivo es los queremos. They were taken alive. We want them alive. It was a demand, not a hope. And yet, behind closed doors, another reality was forming. One that suggested the truth was not just hidden, but protected. As this chapter closes, ask yourself one thing. If so many institutions failed at once, was this disappearance an accident or a design? Remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. The next chapter takes us deeper, where the official story begins to crack. Within days, the government presented its first version of events. It sounded complete, too complete. According to officials, the students had been detained by local police, then handed over to a criminal group. From there, the story blurred into vague language and passive verbs. Things happened. Decisions were made. Responsibility dissolved into air. Families listened in silence. They noticed what was missing: names, timelines, evidence. Every answer created new questions. Why would police hand students to criminals? On whose order? And why did no one intervene? In the third paragraph of this long night of listening, let me gently pause and ask you, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it for you? If these quiet, slow stories help you rest or focus, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you don't lose your place as the story continues. Independent journalists began to investigate. What they found did not match the official narrative. Witnesses described police coordination across jurisdictions. Buses tracked, intercepted, and redirected. Communication logs hinted at commands coming from higher levels, not street patrols acting alone. Then came the phrase that would haunt Mexico for years: the historical truth. Officials declared the case solved, closed, final. According to this version, the students had been killed and their remains destroyed. No bodies were shown. No conclusive forensic proof presented. Just words spoken firmly, as if confidence could replace evidence. Families rejected it immediately. Experts questioned it publicly. International observers raised alarms. If the truth was so solid, why did it crumble under the lightest scrutiny? As protests intensified, another uncomfortable question surfaced. If this story was false, what was it meant to hide? Forensic teams were brought in. Some were local, others international. Their task was simple in theory: confirm what happened. In practice, they encountered obstacles at every step. Evidence had been mishandled, sites contaminated, key locations left unsecured for days. One discovery briefly raised hope. Bone fragments found in a remote area. Officials claimed they belonged to the missing students. Headlines spread fast, but science moved slower than politics. Tests came back inconclusive. Later, some results contradicted the official claims entirely. Halfway through this unfolding story, let me ask you again, quietly, where are you right now, and what time is it where you are? If you're still listening, still following each detail, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. These stories unfold best when you don't miss a chapter. Independent experts issued reports that challenged nearly every part of the government's account. Fires described as intense enough to destroy bodies showed no physical trace. Timelines didn't align. Witness statements appeared coerced or inconsistent. The more science spoke, the less the official story held together. Meanwhile, families continued searching on their own, digging through fields, walking remote paths, asking questions no one wanted to answer. Their grief transformed into endurance, into routine, into a daily refusal to forget. Behind closed doors, pressure mounted. International attention embarrassed officials. Files were reopened, then stalled. Promises made, then delayed. Truth hovered close, but never landed. And beneath all of it was a quiet, terrifying realization. If the evidence was manipulated here, how many other cases had vanished the same way? As investigations widened, the case stopped being just about 43 students. It became a mirror reflecting something much larger. Corruption networks, criminal alliances. The fragile line between authority and organized crime blurred until it nearly disappeared. New testimonies surfaced. Some pointed toward military monitoring that night. Others described surveillance of the students long before they reached Iguala. The idea that this was random began to feel impossible. Too many eyes had been watching. Let me pause here gently in this third section of the chapter. Wherever you are listening from, whatever time the clock shows for you, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. The story doesn't end quickly, and staying connected matters. Truth commissions were formed, dissolved, reformed. Each promised transparency, each delivered fragments. Years passed, governments changed, but the students did not return, and certainty never arrived. What remained was absence. Empty seats at family tables, names read aloud at protests, faces carried on banners through rainless streets. The case refused to fade because forgetting it would mean accepting that disappearance could be policy. As this chapter closes, one final thought lingers in the quiet. If so many forces worked to shape the narrative, what truth was powerful enough to frighten them all? The next chapters move closer to the unanswered heart of the case, and the questions no one has yet dared to fully answer. As the years passed, witnesses began to surface. Not loudly, not confidently, but cautiously, as if every word carried weight. Taxi drivers, street vendors, residents who had seen buses stopped, lights flashing, students running. Many had stayed silent at first. Silence felt safer. Some witnesses later admitted they were afraid. Afraid of police, afraid of gangs, afraid of being remembered. Their stories shared patterns. Vehicles without markings, officers coordinating movements, radios crackling with urgency. None of it felt accidental. Let me pause here softly in this third paragraph. Where are you listening from right now, and what time is it for you? If these slow, careful stories help you rest or think, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. A few witnesses disappeared themselves. Others changed their testimony. Some recanted under pressure. Each alteration added another layer of doubt. Truth, it seemed, was something that needed protection or concealment. Journalists who followed these leads encountered resistance. Files delayed, interviews canceled, sources warned. Yet the same question kept resurfacing. How could so many people see something, yet nothing officially be acknowledged? By the end of this chapter, one thing was clear. The night in Iguala had left behind more than missing students. It had created a population trained to whisper. When national investigations stalled, international experts stepped in. Their presence changed the tone immediately. Questions became sharper, reports more precise, conclusions harder to dismiss. For the first time, the official version faced structured opposition. These experts pointed out inconsistencies others had ignored, communications that stopped abruptly, security footage that vanished, evidence that appeared too late to be trustworthy. Each detail chipped away at the idea of a resolved case. Halfway through this chapter, let me gently ask again. Where are you right now, and what time is it where you are? If you're still listening, still following this unfolding truth, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so the story continues uninterrupted. The response was mixed. Publicly, officials welcomed help. Privately, cooperation slowed, access restricted, meetings postponed. It was as if the closer investigators came to clarity, the more resistance they encountered. Families watched closely. Hope returned in cautious waves. Not certainty, never certainty, but movement. A sense that someone somewhere was still looking. And yet, even with international attention, doors remained closed. Because the truth, when fully opened, threatened more than reputations. It threatened systems. Years passed quietly, one after another. Birthdays came without celebration. Anniversaries were marked with marches instead of cake. The missing students stayed the same age in photographs, while the world around them moved forward. Governments promised renewal, fresh investigations, a new beginning. Files were reopened, statements revised, apologies offered. But apologies do not return the disappeared. They only acknowledge the space where answers should be. Let me pause here softly in this third section. Wherever you are listening from, whatever time it is for you, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. Staying connected keeps these stories alive. The families never stopped asking, never stopped searching. Their persistence became the case's heartbeat. Without them, the story might have faded into statistics. Instead, it remained human: names, faces, voices. As this chapter closes, a heavy thought settles in. Time does not heal unanswered questions. It sharpens them. And as we reach the end of this part, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. When a new government took office, families allowed themselves a careful kind of hope. Promises were made publicly. Words like transparency, justice, and truth were repeated often. The case, officials said, would finally be reopened, not as a formality, but as a real search. Let me pause gently and ask you, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it for you? If this slow, human storytelling helps you unwind, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you can continue this journey without interruption. New investigators reviewed old files and noticed what others had ignored. Gaps where records should have been, testimonies that felt rehearsed, conclusions drawn without proof. Some arrests were reconsidered, others quietly released. The idea of a single criminal group acting alone began to collapse. Officials admitted something rare: mistakes had been made. Evidence had been manipulated. Confessions obtained under pressure could not be trusted. For the families, this was not comfort. It was confirmation of what they had always known. In the middle of this chapter, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. These stories unfold slowly, and staying with them matters. As the chapter closes, a troubling realization settled in. If the truth had been buried once, uncovering it would mean confronting those who helped hide it, and not everyone was ready for that. Chapter 11, The Military Question. One of the most sensitive issues emerged quietly, almost reluctantly. The military had been present in Iguala that night. Not directly involved, officials claimed, only observing, monitoring, watching events unfold without intervening. Families demanded answers. What did they see? What did they record? What did they report? Requests for information were delayed or denied. Military records remained sealed, protected by layers of authority and tradition. Let me pause here softly in this third paragraph. Wherever you are listening from, whatever time it is for you now, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. The story grows heavier from here, and staying connected helps. Independent reports suggested the students' movements had been tracked in real time, that radio communications were intercepted, that knowledge existed but action did not. The difference between knowing and acting became one of the case's most haunting elements. These quiet moments are where the truth often hides. As this chapter ends, one question lingers in the darkness. Is witnessing a crime without stopping it a form of involvement, or a deeper kind of silence? New evidence arrived not as a revelation, but as fragments. Phone data, messages recovered, timelines adjusted. Each piece altered the picture slightly, never enough to complete it, but enough to disturb the official calm. Some remains were identified, not all, and not conclusively tied to a single event. Each confirmation brought both relief and renewed pain. Relief in certainty, pain in permanence. The families accepted facts only when science, not politics, delivered them. Let me gently pause again in this third section. Where are you right now, and what time is it for you? If you're still listening, still following this slow unraveling, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. If this story moves you, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. These stories are not meant to rush. They are meant to stay. As the chapter closes, the truth feels closer than ever, yet still out of reach, like a shape in fog, visible only when you stop chasing it. When a new government took office, families allowed themselves a careful kind of hope. Promises were made publicly. Words like transparency, justice, and truth were repeated often. The case, officials said, would finally be reopened, not as a formality, but as a real search. If this slow, human storytelling helps you unwind, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you can continue this journey without interruption. New investigators reviewed old files and noticed what others had ignored. Gaps where records should have been, testimonies that felt rehearsed, conclusions drawn without proof. Some arrests were reconsidered, others quietly released. The idea of a single criminal group acting alone began to collapse. Officials admitted something rare. Mistakes had been made. Evidence had been manipulated. Confessions obtained under pressure could not be trusted. For the families, this was not comfort. It was confirmation of what they had always known. As the chapter closes, a troubling realization settled in. If the truth had been buried once, uncovering it would mean confronting those who helped hide it, and not everyone was ready for that. When a new government took office, families allowed themselves a careful kind of hope. Promises were made publicly. Words like transparency, justice, and truth were repeated often. The case, officials said, would finally be reopened, not as a formality, but as a real search. New investigators reviewed old files and noticed what others had ignored. Gaps where records should have been, testimonies that felt rehearsed, conclusions drawn without proof. Some arrests were reconsidered, others quietly released. The idea of a single criminal group acting alone began to collapse. Officials admitted something rare. Mistakes had been made. Evidence had been manipulated. Confessions obtained under pressure could not be trusted. For the families, this was not comfort. It was confirmation of what they had always known. These stories unfold slowly, and staying with them matters. As the chapter closes, a troubling realization settled in. If the truth had been buried once, uncovering it would mean confronting those who helped hide it, and not everyone was ready for that. One of the most sensitive issues emerged quietly, almost reluctantly. The military had been present in Iguala that night. Not directly involved, officials claimed, only observing, monitoring, watching events unfold without intervening. Families demanded answers. What did they see? What did they record? What did they report? Requests for information were delayed or denied. Military records remained sealed, protected by layers of authority and tradition. Let me pause here softly wherever you are listening from, whatever time it is for you now. Remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. The story grows heavier from here, and staying connected helps. Independent reports suggested the students' movements had been tracked in real time, that radio communications were intercepted, that knowledge existed but action did not. The difference between knowing and acting became one of the case's most haunting elements. These quiet moments are where the truth often hides. As this chapter ends, one question lingers in the darkness. Is witnessing a crime without stopping it a form of involvement, or a deeper kind of silence? New evidence arrived not as a revelation, but as fragments. Phone data, messages recovered, timelines adjusted. Each piece altered the picture slightly, never enough to complete it, but enough to disturb the official calm. Some remains were identified, not all, and not conclusively tied to a single event. Each confirmation brought both relief and renewed pain. Relief in certainty, pain in permanence. The families accepted facts only when science, not politics, delivered them. Let me gently pause again in this third section. Where are you right now, and what time is it for you? If you're still listening, still following this slow unraveling, remember to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. These stories are not meant to rush. They are meant to stay. As the chapter closes, the truth feels closer than ever, yet still out of reach, like a shape in fog, visible only when you stop chasing it. By the time years had passed, waiting had become a way of life. Not an action, but a condition. Families woke up waiting, ate while waiting, slept lightly waiting. Hope no longer arrived as excitement, but as endurance, quiet, stubborn, unyielding. Some parents memorized every version of the story ever told. They could recite dates, names, contradictions. They knew which promises had expired and which were still being recycled. They listened closely, not because they trusted, but because they had learned to detect evasion in tone alone. Around this point in the story, let me ask you gently, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? If you've stayed this far, if this slow unfolding holds you, you can support the channel by subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications. It helps these long, quiet stories continue finding their way through the night. Public attention rose and fell. News cycles moved on. Other tragedies replaced this one. But for the families, time did not dilute absence. It sharpened it. Every unanswered question became heavier with age. What remained most disturbing was not just what had been done, but how normal everything looked afterward. The streets still filled. The city still breathed. The world had learned how to exist alongside disappearance. And somewhere in that ordinary continuation, the truth continued to wait. As new investigations pressed forward, resistance became more visible. Files were delayed. Requests stalled. Cooperation arrived only partially, selectively. It was no longer subtle. The truth, it seemed, had crossed into dangerous territory. Some officials spoke anonymously. Their words were careful, incomplete, heavy with implication. They suggested chains of command, protected figures, decisions made far above street level. But names were never spoken. Fear had learned to speak fluently. Families sensed the shift. The closer the investigation moved toward power, the slower it became. Justice did not stop, it hesitated. And hesitation, repeated long enough, becomes another form of denial. Behind the scenes, political pressure grew. Admitting the full truth would not just close a case, it would open many others. Patterns would emerge. Questions would multiply. Stability itself felt threatened by honesty. As this chapter settles into silence, one thought lingers. When truth becomes dangerous, who is it truly protecting? There is no neat ending to a disappearance. No final sentence that resolves it. Only spaces where answers should live. Empty chairs. Names spoken in present tense, because the past feels too final. Some families say they are no longer searching for hope. Only truth. Even truth that hurts. Even truth that confirms the unbearable. Because uncertainty, stretched across years, becomes its own quiet cruelty. The case remains open, officially and emotionally. It exists in documents, protests, anniversaries, and memory. It resists closure not because it is unsolved, but because it is unresolved. As this chapter ends, the story feels suspended, not finished, not abandoned, waiting like the families themselves. And with that stillness comes a final question for this part of the journey. If disappearance erases people, what does it do to the world that allows it? Over time, memory became an act of resistance. The families learned that forgetting was the one thing they could never allow. Every march, every banner, every name spoken aloud pushed back against the quiet pressure to move on. Memory, they realized, was louder than denial. The students were remembered not as victims, but as people. Young men who joked on bus rides, who worried about exams, who believed teaching could change villages that had long been ignored. Their humanity was repeated deliberately, as if saying it often enough might undo what had been done. Anniversaries gathered crowds in the streets. Candles flickered. Names were read one by one, each followed by the same response, present. It was not symbolic. It was defiant. a refusal to accept disappearance as an ending. Authorities attended some ceremonies. They spoke carefully, choosing words that promised commitment without obligation. Families listened without reaction. Experience had taught them how easily words dissolve. Behind the public rituals, the search continued quietly. New leads surfaced, then faded. Old testimonies were re-examined. Each development carried weight, not because it guaranteed answers, but because it proved the case was still alive. As the years stretched on, something unexpected happened. The case of the 43 became a reference point. Other families came forward. Other disappearances found language through this one. The student's absence had created a vocabulary for grief that others could finally use. And in that shared space of loss, the story refused to end. Justice usually arrives with deadlines, court dates, and conclusions. But in this case, justice seemed to exist outside time. Promised repeatedly, delayed endlessly, reshaped with each administration. Always approaching, never arriving. Some arrests were made, charges announced, then revised, then dropped. Each legal movement stirred attention briefly before returning to stillness. The process looked active, yet progress felt illusionary. Families learned the rhythm. Announcements followed by silence. Optimism followed by explanation. Explanation followed by delay. It was exhausting, but exhaustion did not stop them. It simply slowed their steps. International pressure resurfaced periodically. Reports were cited again. Old criticisms restated. Each time, the same question echoed. How could so much be known, yet so little concluded? There was no single villain to point to, no final confrontation. Instead, there was a system layered, protected, resilient. Responsibility dispersed so widely that it almost vanished. And yet, something fragile persisted. The truth had not been erased, only postponed. It lived in documents, in testimonies, in inconsistencies that refused to align, waiting like everything else. As this chapter settles, one thought remains steady. Justice delayed is not always justice denied, but it is always justice strained. For the families, that night in Iguala never fully ended. It replayed endlessly, not as memory, but as presence. A fixed point in time that everything else revolved around. Before and after, then and now. Some parents say they still listen for footsteps, still expect calls, still imagine the return unfolding quietly, without cameras or apologies. Hope had changed shape, but it had not disappeared. The case no longer belonged only to courts or commissions. It lived in classrooms, murals, songs, and whispered conversations. It became part of Mexico's collective consciousness. Uncomfortable, unresolved, unavoidable. What made it most haunting was not what was known, but what remained unanswered. Who gave the order? Who obeyed? Who watched? Who decided silence was safer than truth? As this chapter closes, the story feels suspended in darkness. Not dramatic, not loud, just unfinished. Like a sentence waiting for its final word. And somewhere in that stillness, the 43 remain. Not found, not forgotten, not gone. Official records are meant to preserve truth. In this case, they revealed something else: absence. Pages missing, timelines broken, statements that ended abruptly where clarity should have begun. The gaps spoke louder than the words themselves. Investigators learned to read what was not written. A radio log that stopped mid-transmission. A patrol report that skipped critical minutes. Surveillance cameras that malfunctioned at the exact wrong time. Individually, each gap could be explained. Together, they formed a pattern. Families were shown documents that felt incomplete, sanitized. They learned to ask for originals, for metadata, for context. Often, those requests disappeared into bureaucracy, never formally denied, simply unanswered. The deeper the review went, the clearer it became. The case had been managed as much as it had been investigated. Information released strategically, silence deployed deliberately, truth treated as something negotiable. Yet even controlled narratives leave traces. Inconsistencies cannot be fully erased. They linger, waiting for someone patient enough to connect them. As this chapter fades, a quiet realization settles in. What is missing from the record may be the most truthful part of it. Silence was never an option for the families. Not because they were fearless, but because surrender felt worse. Over time, they became advocates, researchers, archivists of their own loss. They learned legal language, forensic terminology, media strategy. Many had never spoken publicly before this. Now they addressed crowds, governments, international bodies. Their voices carried grief, but also precision. They corrected officials, challenged timelines, asked questions that could not be answered easily. The cost was heavy: constant travel, emotional exhaustion, the strain of hope renewed and withdrawn repeatedly. Still, they returned again and again because absence without action felt unbearable. Other families joined them, parents searching for sons, daughters, siblings. The case of the 43 became a doorway. Through it came thousands of names, each with its own unanswered night. In that shared struggle, something fragile formed. Not closure, but connection. Not resolution, but solidarity. The disappearance had multiplied, but so had the refusal to accept it. As this chapter settles, one truth becomes clear. Silence is not neutral. It sides with disappearance. And the families chose otherwise. Years have passed, but the case remains unfinished. Not forgotten, not resolved. Suspended between what is known and what is still withheld. Governments change. Investigators rotate. But the central question remains untouched. The truth does not behave like a conclusion. It does not arrive all at once. It lingers. It returns. It waits until conditions allow it to surface. In this case, it presses constantly against the edges of denial. Some believe the full story will only emerge when those involved feel safe enough to speak, or when silence no longer protects them. Until then, fragments continue to surface, reshaping the narrative little by little. The students remain present in absence, in murals fading slowly under sun and rain, in classrooms where their names are spoken, in marches where footsteps echo through streets that once watched them vanish. As this chapter closes, the night feels close again. Not dramatic, not violent, just unresolved. A truth standing still, refusing to disappear, waiting for the moment it can finally be named. The city of Iguala still exists as it always has. Streets fill, markets open. Life continues with an almost unsettling normality. Yet the name carries a shadow now, one that stretches far beyond geography. It has become a symbol, not just of loss, but of unanswered truth. For many, Iguala represents a moment when the boundary between safety and danger quietly dissolved, where authority blurred into threat, where trust fractured without warning. The disappearance did not remain confined to one night. It followed the country forward, shaping how people understood power and vulnerability. The students' college still stands. New students arrive each year, aware of the history they inherit. They walk the same paths, sit in the same classrooms, carry the weight of names that should have graduated before them. Memory is not optional there. It is part of the curriculum. Officials still speak of progress, of commitment, of ongoing efforts, but progress measured in words cannot compete with years measured in absence. The shadow remains because the truth remains incomplete. As this chapter closes, the story feels less like a mystery and more like a presence, something that stands quietly behind every official statement, waiting to be acknowledged fully. Hope does not disappear, transforms. In the early years, it was loud and urgent. Later, it became careful. Now, it exists as something quieter, steady, restrained, deeply personal. Some families say they no longer imagine reunion. They imagine answers. Others still believe return is possible, not because evidence supports it, but because letting go feels like betrayal. Each family carries hope differently, shaped by love rather than logic. Psychologists speak of unresolved grief, of loss without confirmation, of mourning that cannot complete itself. But no terminology fully captures what it means to wait for someone whose story has no ending. The families have learned to live alongside uncertainty, not comfortably, but deliberately. They mark time not by years, but by efforts, investigations reopened, reports released, promises renewed. What remains strongest is not despair, but insistence. A quiet insistence that truth matters, even when delayed, especially when delayed. As this chapter fades, one thing becomes clear. Hope, when stripped of illusion, can still endure. The disappearance of the 43 has become a question passed from one generation to the next. Students learn about it in school. Activists reference it in speeches. Artists paint it into walls and memory. It refuses to settle into the past. Each retelling adds distance, but not closure. The facts remain contested, the responsibility unresolved, the night unaccounted for. This unsettles those who prefer history neatly archived. Some believe the truth will surface gradually, through documents declassified years from now. Others think it will arrive suddenly, carried by someone who can no longer bear silence. No one knows which form it will take, only that it has not yet arrived. What gives the case its endurance is not mystery alone, but relevance. It speaks to anyone who has questioned authority, demanded accountability, or refused to accept disappearance as fate. As this chapter draws to a close, the story does not resolve. Pauses, like a breath held, waiting for release. There is no final image to offer, no scene that ties everything together. Only names, 43 of them, spoken again and again so they do not fade into statistics. The families continue. The investigations continue. The questions continue. The case remains open not just in files, but in conscience. It exists wherever someone refuses to forget. The night in Iguala has stretched across years, but it has not erased those who vanished into it. Absence has not defeated memory. Silence has not defeated insistence. As this story comes to rest, ask yourself quietly, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it for you? If this narration carried you through the night, if it held your attention or your calm, you can support the channel by subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications. It helps these stories continue, slowly, carefully, and without being forgotten. And with that, the story does not end. It waits. On the night of September 10th, 2001, Sneha and Philip left her apartment in Battery Park City, Manhattan, never imagining she would never return. She was a 31-year-old woman, a doctor, intelligent, with her whole life ahead of her. That night she decided to go shopping, something completely normal, something we all do. She bought lingerie, shoes, and beauty products at Century 21, a department store just a few blocks from her home. Security cameras captured her leaving the store at 10 p.m. with her bags in hand. And that's where all trace of her ends. What makes this case absolutely unique and heartbreaking is that the next day, September 11th, 2001, something happened that would change the world forever. And Sneha's disappearance was buried under the rubble of one of the greatest tragedies in modern history. Did she die in the terrorist attacks? Or did something happen to her the night before? That question has haunted her family for more than 2 decades. Sneha Philip was not an ordinary person. Born in India, she had immigrated to the United States with her family as a child. She was brilliant, dedicated, a physician working in internal medicine at a New York hospital. Everyone spoke of her compassion, her commitment to helping others. But Sneha also had another side, a darker, more complicated one. In the months before her disappearance, her professional and personal life was in free fall. She had been fired from 2 consecutive jobs due to alcohol problems. Her marriage to Ron, her husband, was completely fractured. There were rumors that Sneha had extramarital relationships with both men and women. On the night of September 10th, she had a heated argument with Ron. That argument would be the last conversation anyone in her family would have with her. And what no one knew was that the purchases she made that night contained a detail that would completely change the narrative of her disappearance. Before continuing, I want to ask you, where are you listening to me from right now and what time is it there? Leave it in the comments. I'm fascinated to know that you're joining me from different corners of the world. And if this story is capturing you as much as it is me, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and turn on notifications because this mystery has twists you won't expect. Now let's continue. On September 10th, Sneha had spent the day alone. Her husband Ron was working. She had been suspended from her job at the hospital just days before, so she was technically on leave. Around 4 p.m., Sneha called her mother to talk briefly. Nothing in that conversation suggested anything was wrong. Then, around 6 p.m., she left her apartment. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She didn't leave any note. She simply took her wallet and left. Security footage from the building shows her leaving, dressed casually but put together. She walked toward the World Trade Center area, where the Century 21 store was located. She entered the store around 7:30 p.m. and was there for almost 2.5 hours trying on clothes, looking at products. Finally, at 10 p.m., she purchased several items and left. The cameras captured her walking through the streets of Manhattan with her bags. And after that, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Ron Lieberman, Sneha's husband, arrived home late that night, around midnight. He didn't see Sneha, but it didn't worry him too much either. Their relationship was tense, and it was common for them to spend time apart. He assumed she was with a friend or would arrive later. He went to sleep. The next morning, September 11th, Ron woke up early to go to work. Sneha still hadn't appeared, but he thought maybe she had spent the night out. It wouldn't be the first time. He left his apartment located in Battery Park City, just a few blocks from the World Trade Center. While he was on the subway on his way to work, the unthinkable happened. The first plane hit the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. Ron, like millions of people, was in shock. He immediately thought of Sneha. Had she gone to work that morning? Was she near the towers? He tried calling her over and over again. Nothing. Her phone had no signal. In the midst of the absolute chaos that broke out in New York that day, Ron desperately tried to locate Sneha. He called friends, family, hospitals. No one had seen her. No one knew anything. Sneha's family also began frantically searching for her. Her brother went to her apartment, but it was empty. Sneha's keys were in the apartment, which was strange. Her documents, her passport, everything was still there. The only things missing were her and the shopping bags she had carried the night before. In the middle of the greatest tragedy the United States had experienced, with nearly 3,000 people dead or missing, Sneha Phillip became a case within a catastrophe. Investigators didn't know whether to include her on the list of September 11th victims or treat her as an unrelated missing person. And here began the debate that would last for years. Where was Sneha from 10 p.m. on September 10th until the morning of September 11th? Those lost hours are the key to everything. Sneha's family, especially her husband Ron, proposed a theory that quickly gained traction. According to them, Sneha, being a doctor and having a compassionate heart, would have run toward the Twin Towers when the attacks occurred to help the victims. This theory painted Sneha as a hero, someone who in the moment of greatest need left everything to save lives. Ron argued that she was probably in the area, saw the smoke, heard the chaos, and her medical instincts led her straight to ground zero. Once there, she could have been trapped in the collapse of the towers. This narrative was beautiful, noble, and gave meaningful closure to an incomprehensible disappearance. The media adopted it. Sneha was portrayed as one of the heroic victims of 9/11. But there was a huge problem with this theory. There was absolutely no evidence that Sneha had been near the towers that morning. No witness saw her. No camera captured her. And most importantly, none of her colleagues or acquaintances placed her there. When investigators reviewed what Sneha had purchased at Century 21 that last night, they found something that made the Good Samaritan theory sound less credible. Sneha had bought lingerie, dress shoes, and beauty products. These weren't purchases someone makes before going home to sleep. These were purchases someone makes when they have plans for that night. Plans with whom? That was the question. Investigators began to suspect that Sneha had not returned to her apartment that night of September 10th, that she had spent the night elsewhere with someone else, and that perhaps what happened to her had nothing to do with the terrorist attacks the next day. This theory was supported by the fact that Sneha had been involved in multiple romantic affairs outside her marriage. She had been going out with both men and women in the previous months. Some of these encounters had occurred in bars and clubs in Manhattan. Is it possible that she met someone that night? That she went to that person's apartment? And that something went terribly wrong? Ron returned to his apartment days after September 11th, once the city began to calm down a bit. He desperately searched for any clue about where Sneha might be. And that's when he noticed something crucial. The shopping bags Sneha had carried that night were not in the apartment. Neither were the clothes she had bought. If Sneha had returned to the apartment that night, where were her purchases? Ron argued that perhaps she had left the bags somewhere else before running to the towers. But investigators weren't convinced. It was also discovered that the building's card access system did not register any entry by Sneha after she left on September 10th. This was significant because every time someone entered the building, an electronic record was kept. Sneha's last record was from when she left at 6 p.m. There was no record of her coming back. This strongly suggested that Sneha never returned home that night. As investigators delved deeper into Sneha's life, they discovered a woman completely different from the public image she projected. Sneha frequented lesbian bars in Greenwich Village. She had had several relationships with women, some of them serious. She had also been involved with men outside her marriage. Her alcohol consumption had escalated dramatically in recent months. She had been seen several times intoxicated in public places. Her colleagues at the hospital had reported that she was late, sometimes smelled of alcohol, and her performance had decreased considerably. All this had culminated in her dismissal. Ron knew about some of these problems, but not the full extent. When the truth came out during the investigation, many began to question whether they really knew Sneha. Was it possible that on the night of September 10th, she had gone to meet someone she knew from the nightlife scene? Someone dangerous? Investigators tracked down several people Sneha had been involved with. All were questioned. None admitted to having seen her that night. In 2004, 3 years after Sneha's disappearance, her family filed a petition for her to be officially declared a victim of September 11th. This would allow them to receive compensation from the Victim Compensation Fund. But the case wasn't that simple. The New York City Medical Examiner rejected the petition, arguing there was insufficient evidence that Sneha had been near the towers when they collapsed. The family appealed. A legal battle began that would last for years. The family's lawyers presented evidence that Sneha was a compassionate person, that her medical instincts would have led her to help. They presented testimony from people who knew her. But the opposition argued that Sneha's recent history, her personal problems, and the fact that she never returned home on the night of September 10th suggested that something completely unrelated to the terrorist attacks had happened to her. The debate became very public, very painful for the family. Sneha was being judged posthumously, her private life exposed for everyone to see. If you still haven't subscribed to the channel, do it now. This case gets more and more complex, and you need to be here for the ending. Give it a like, turn on notifications, and share with someone who loves real mysteries. In the midst of all this controversy, a witness appeared who would change everything. A person claimed to have seen Sneha on the morning of September 11th, walking toward the Twin Towers with what appeared to be medical equipment. This testimony came years after the attacks and could never be completely verified. The alleged witness described a woman matching Sneha's appearance, walking hurriedly toward the World Trade Center area around 9 a.m. They said the woman seemed determined, focused. The family clung to this testimony as proof that Sneha had been there, that she had died as a hero. But investigators had doubts. Why did this witness wait so long to come forward? Why hadn't they reported this immediately after the attacks? Was it a real memory or something constructed over time? Human memory is notoriously unreliable, especially after traumatic events. It's possible this witness genuinely believed they saw Sneha, but it was actually someone else. Or worse yet, that it was completely fabricated. After years of legal battle, finally in 2008, a judge made a decision. He declared that Sneha Phillip should be officially considered a victim of September 11th. The judge based his decision on the fact that there was no conclusive evidence that something had happened to her before the attacks, and that given her profession and personality, it was reasonable to conclude she would have responded to the emergency. This decision was celebrated by the family as vindication. Finally, Sneha would be remembered as a hero, but for investigators and many observers, the case remained unresolved. The legal ruling didn't answer the fundamental question. Where was Sneha from 10 p.m. on September 10th until the morning of September 11th? And what really happened to her? The legal ruling gave administrative closure, but didn't give real answers. And there's something deeply unsatisfying about that, because the truth is that no one knows for certain what happened to Sneha Philip. There's another theory, darker, that some private investigators have explored. This theory suggests that Sneha was the victim of a crime of passion on the night of September 10th. Given her history of complicated relationships and turbulent personal life, it's possible she met someone that night, there was an argument, and things got out of control. Perhaps that person killed her accidentally or intentionally. And then, when the September 11th attacks occurred the next day, that person saw the perfect opportunity to dispose of the body. With thousands of people dead and missing, with absolute chaos in the city, who would notice one more body? It's a macabre theory, but it's not impossible. In fact, several similar cases have been documented throughout history, where criminals have used natural disasters or mass tragedies to cover up crimes. If this is what happened, Sneha's body could be anywhere, could have been left in the ground zero area, where it would be impossible to identify among the rubble. Or it could be buried somewhere completely different. Ron Lieberman, Sneha's husband, has maintained a relatively low profile over the years. After the 2008 court ruling, he gave some interviews where he talked about his wife and his belief that she died helping others. But there are those who have pointed out inconsistencies in his statements over the years. Initially, Ron said their marriage was solid. Then he admitted they had problems. First he said he didn't know about Sneha's affairs. Later he admitted he had suspicions. Does this mean Ron is hiding something? Not necessarily. It's completely understandable that someone in his position, dealing with such traumatic loss and under public scrutiny, might have difficulty being completely transparent. Also, no one wants to publicly admit their marriage was fractured, especially when your wife has been declared a national hero. But these inconsistencies have led some to speculate. Is it possible Ron knew more than he said? That maybe Sneha told him where she was going that night and he concealed it? The police investigated him extensively and never found any evidence he was involved in Sneha's disappearance. What makes Sneha's case particularly complex is that she wasn't the only person who disappeared around September 11th under questionable circumstances. There were several other cases of people who disappeared days before or after the attacks, and whose cases became intertwined with the tragedy. Some of these cases were eventually resolved. Bodies were found, circumstances clarified. But others, like Sneha's, remain in limbo. The problem is that September 11th created a massive blind spot in criminal investigation. With thousands of detectives, officers, and resources focused on the terrorist attacks and their aftermath, other crimes didn't receive the attention they normally would have. If someone disappeared or was murdered in New York around those dates, their case probably wasn't investigated with the usual rigor. And if the body never appeared, it's very possible that case will never be solved. Sneha may have been a victim of this perfect storm of circumstances. Over the years, several leads have emerged that seemed promising but ultimately led nowhere. In 2006, someone reported seeing a woman who looked like Sneha in another state. Police investigated, but it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. In 2010, an unidentified woman turned up dead in another city. For a moment, it was thought it might be Sneha. DNA tests confirmed it wasn't. There have been occasional reports of people claiming to have seen Sneha in different parts of the country, even outside the United States. Each of these reports was investigated. None have been confirmed. It's frustrating, it's exhausting, it's devastating for the family. Every time a new lead emerges, there's a flash of hope, and every time it fades, the pain is renewed. After more than 20 years, the chances of finding Sneha alive are virtually nil. But without a body, without concrete evidence, it's impossible to know for certain what happened to her. The fact that Sneha was officially declared a victim of September 11th has been controversial from the beginning. There are those who firmly believe she was in the towers, that she died helping others, and that she deserves to be honored as a hero. But there are others who argue this is a distortion of the truth, that there's no real evidence she was there, and that her inclusion on the victim list minimizes those who definitely died in the attacks. This debate touches sensitive nerves. On one hand, we understand the family's desire to find meaning in such an incomprehensible loss. It's comforting to think Sneha died saving lives rather than having been a victim of a violent crime or her own decisions. On the other hand, truth matters. And the truth is we don't know what happened to Sneha. Declaring her a hero based on assumptions and not facts can be problematic. Where do we draw the line? How much evidence do we need before making claims about what happened to someone? It's a difficult question without an easy answer. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, give this video a like, and turn on notifications. We're reaching the end of this story and you won't want to miss the conclusions. Sneha's family has spent more than 2 decades without answers. Her mother, her siblings, all have had to learn to live with uncertainty. They couldn't have a traditional funeral because there was no body to bury. They couldn't have closure because they don't know what happened. Grief without closure is one of the most painful experiences a human being can experience. It's called ambiguous loss, and it's psychologically devastating. The human mind needs closure, needs to know, needs to understand. When that's not available, the pain becomes chronic. Sneha's family has talked about how every September 11th is a painful reminder. While the country commemorates the victims of the terrorist attacks, they commemorate Sneha without really knowing if she died that day or not. They've created memorials, they've shared memories, they've kept her memory alive. But deep down, there will probably always be a part of them wondering, what really happened that night of September 10th? Sneha Phillips' case teaches us several important things. First, it shows us how a massive tragedy can complicate or even bury individual cases. The September 11th attacks were so devastating that many other mysteries went unsolved. Second, it reminds us that people are complex. Sneha wasn't just a dedicated physician or just a woman with problems. She was both. She was human with virtues and flaws. Judging her one way or the other is to simplify a life that was much more complicated. Third, this case illustrates the dangers of building narratives without sufficient evidence. The story of Sneha as a 9/11 hero is beautiful, but it may not be true. And when we privilege the comforting narrative over the facts, we move away from the truth. Finally, the case shows us the importance of never forgetting the missing. Even when cases go cold, even when decades pass, these people deserve to be remembered and their cases deserve attention. Because every missing person is someone who was loved, who had dreams, who mattered. More than 20 years later, Sneha Phillips' disappearance remains a complete mystery. There's no body, no crime scene, no confirmed suspects. All we have are theories, speculation, and an enormous amount of unanswered questions. Did she die in the September 11th attacks? It's possible, but there's no evidence. Was she the victim of a crime the night before? Also possible and even probable according to some investigators. Did she disappear voluntarily? Extremely unlikely, but not impossible. The truth is we'll probably never know. Unless someone who knows something decides to speak up, unless new evidence appears, this case will remain unsolved forever. And that's deeply unsatisfying. We like to think all mysteries can be solved, that the truth always comes to light. But the reality is there are cases that remain open, questions that go unanswered, families that never get the closure they deserve. Sneha Phillips is one of those cases. A woman who went out to buy clothes one September night and never returned. A life full of complexity, contradictions, humanity, and an ending that no one knows. If this case impacted you, if it made you think, if it left you with more questions than answers, let me know in the comments what theory you think is most likely. 9/11 hero? Victim of a crime? Something completely different? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, Share it with someone who loves real mysteries, and turn on notifications for more cases that will keep you awake at night. See you in the next mystery.